12:31, and although there's still folks flowing in, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to day 2 of the Midwest Bringing the Farm to School Regional Facilitators Workshop. We hope you enjoyed the day yesterday, and we're looking forward to taking a deeper dive into the trainer's toolkit over the next 3 days. As we start off day 2 together, we want to encourage folks, as you're able to, turn on your cameras, and while we ask that you stay muted, if you're not speaking, please feel free to come off the mic and ask questions and share as needed. Thank you again for sharing these next few days with us. Before we jump into what we have in store for today, I want to involve you all in a quick activity. So I'll let folks flow in just a bit more, just because we want to be able to have everyone participate. But just going to ask the question: what are you most interested in learning more about, and we're discussing further with your team today? So I'll give you all the next just minute or two to think about that. Share your responses in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and share your thoughts. And to those of you who are just now joining us, we're just doing a quick activity to think about, what are you most interested in learning about today, and what would you like to discuss further with your team? So feel free to share your thoughts through the chat, or just unmute yourself to share your thoughts there. These are great sharings. Thank you. Okay, I think we're going to move on now, but feel free to just continue to share your thoughts on that question as we move forward. But yeah, we're going to jump into what we have in store today. Before we get started, this is just a reminder that your participant home base document has all the links you'll need to follow along with us, including links to the Jamboards, the website, digital versions of the trainer's toolkit, as well as workshop agenda for this week. One thing to note, we've updated the agenda to show all the breakdowns and breaks that you'll have, as well as the state breakout group sessions that will occur. And then in addition, those breakout sessions are indicated with a star. If you have trouble finding anything, just let us know and we'll be able to direct you to the right place. So today we'll focus on doing a deep dive into the producer curriculum, specifically the introductions and module 1 and module 2. Throughout the day, you'll also have the opportunity to work within your state breakouts to explore the ideas in the curriculum and think forward to your local producer training. We'd like to remind you that implementation of the training may look different from state to state and training to training. As we talked about yesterday, you may form a team to plan a standalone training alone, or you may pull pieces of the Bringing the Farm to School training to enhance other producer events. We'll highlight and uplift different ways that the curriculum is flexible and can adapt to different formats and approaches. Before we review each module, I'd like to orient you to how we'll be actually approaching the module overview. For each curriculum module, we'll be walking through the content section by section, in some case slide by slide, to familiarize you all to the content of the modules and to help you envision and plan for presenting the curriculum material yourself. We encourage you to follow along in both the facilitator guide and your producer workbook, and we'll give you signs to post throughout to help you follow along, like the example image here. As we move through the modules, we'll point out activities and opportunities for local customization and facilitator tips for you to think about when you present to producers. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Lacey to get us started with the producer curriculum overview. Thanks, Lacey.
Thanks, Tomas, and great to see everybody again today. This is Lacey Stevens with the National Farm to School Network, and I'm going to briefly cover a really important tool and resource that we hope that you'll continue to come back through both throughout this training and as you move forward in planning your own trainings and utilizing this curriculum. And these are the training module outlines. So these outlines they start on page 11 of your producer workbook. Excuse me, sorry, I was going to say the right thing to not confuse everybody. Your facilitator guide, the yellow one. So you can find the first one on page 11. And the purpose of these training module outlines is to provide an easy to use reference and snapshot of all of the module contents in one place. And so as you get to know the curriculum a little bit, you can use these outlines to kind of see how the different resources fit together, how the different activities fit together, and kind of understand the flow of the training overall. And then as you move forward and start to plan your training, start to identify the key concepts that you want to bring to the training, the activities you want to bring to the training, then you can really use these modules to kind of identify how all those pieces fit together in a cohesive training format. So these are really valuable tools as you continue to move forward. And throughout the training week, I encourage you to continue to come back to these to stay oriented too. So I'll give you a moment to make sure that you're on page 11 of your facilitator guide. So these are the training focused, so you as a trainer focused training outlines. Producers also have a slightly different format. You can see that on the right-hand side of your screen there. And that really just gives them the information that they might need as a trainer, excuse me, as a participant and as a producer. And those start at the beginning of each module within the producer guide. So that's where you'll find those producer focused outlines in the producer guide starting at the beginning of each module. So let's take a look and see what the different components are here of each of these training module outlines. So this is an example here on page 12, from page 12 of your facilitator guide of the module 1 training module outline. So within each training module outline, you'll find the training topic and duration. You'll find the learning objectives for each section broken down. You'll find the content and core concepts. So this is really the outline of all of the contents you'll find within each of those different sections. Sorry, my dog is joining in the conversation today. And then you'll find training activities and materials. And this is really a great place to find. We've also included links here for some of those materials, including the videos, links to some of the case studies that are utilized. This is kind of that one-stop shop for all of those resources in one place. And again, looking at kind of the comparison between the producer-focused training outline, we see the producer has the information that they might need as they're walking through their module. So the learning objectives, kind of the overview for them to get a different visual, and then the links to all those learning materials like the worksheets and the case studies that they might want to reference. So each presenter is going to be going through in depth these modules, but just so you can start to get a feel of the flow of the training, I'm just going to walk through each training outlined and the kind of high level training topics. And I encourage you to continue to follow along in your facilitator guide. And these are between pages 11 and 17. So we're going to start out, Jenny Lee's going to start us out by talking about the introduction, which gives high level overview and information about how the training will flow for producers. We move into module 1, which, as you can see here, is really focused on getting to know school markets. So we have special sections around child nutrition programs and understanding child nutrition programs, local food sourcing and procurement, as well as we have an optional content session focused on child and adult care food program and the summer food service program. Then later this afternoon, we're going to hear from Robert around Module 2, which is focused on selling to schools. So the sections within selling to schools include understanding farm to school market channels, as well as that selling to school districts component. Tomorrow, we'll be digging deeper into Modules 3 and 4. So tomorrow, we'll hear from Margot from NCAT around Module 3, which is focused on choosing the right products to sell to producers. And that includes choosing the right product as well as product development. And then Tammy will share with us more about Module 4, which is growing for schools. So we have business planning, scaling up production, crop planning and production, as well as livestock production, and then navigating school food safety standards. And then we wrap up with a look at the conclusion, which is really focused on the planning for action, which, as you know, and as you've heard, that's really a theme throughout, is all about kind of action planning for the producer, and in our case this week, action planning for you as a facilitator. So with that, again, encourage you to continue to come back to these pages to keep you oriented with the flow, and maybe even make some notes, identify activities that you think are really great you want to make sure you feature, identify some of the maybe challenges or content that really addresses challenges that you know producers have, to really utilize these outlines as a tool for you as you move forward. And I'm going to turn it over to Jenny Lee to get us started with the introduction.
Great, thanks, Lacey. Welcome, everyone. This is Jenny Lee Harris with the National Farm to School Network. So as Lacey said, we'll be spending the next 30 minutes or so walking through the content found in the introduction module in both the facilitator guide and the producer workbook. So I will be pausing for questions throughout, so keep an ear out for those moments. And always feel free to drop questions in the chat, and we'll try to make sure that those get answered as we go through as well. So for this section, going through the introduction, we will be going back and forth between the facilitator and facilitator guide and producer workbook. So hopefully both of those resources are already out. We'll be following along with the slides that are visible as thumbnails in the facilitator guide, and those slide decks are also accessible online. And as Tomas mentioned earlier, I will be signposting where we are in each resource by including visual cues like the slide images shown here, as well as page numbers and references throughout. So if at any point you cannot find where we are or need something repeated, feel free to drop your question or comment in the chat. So on this slide that you're looking at, I wanted to make sure that we just zoom out and make sure we're all in the same place. So for the facilitator guide, the introduction starts on page 18, and for the producer workbook, it starts on page 2. So everyone should have both of these open to look back at side by side. And if you don't have the hard copies, you can access those online. And Tammy just dropped that link in the chat. So this is how each module starts in both the facilitator guide and producer workbook. So in the facilitator guide, each module includes an about section, followed by a module curriculum outline, as well as background information, including core concepts, digging deeper resources, and the case studies that will appear in the module, and key terms. So this info is really intended to be a snapshot of what you'll find in the module for planning purposes. And in the producer workbook, producers will see an even more streamlined version of this, which was shown on the previous slide. And so that's basically just the curriculum outline followed by content. So let's take a closer look at the curriculum outline, which is, I think, the previous slide. Sorry, Lacey, you're ahead of me. So this is on page 18 of the facilitator guide. And like I said, the simplified version is on page 2, and Lacey already went through this a little bit. But for the introduction, content is really focused on introducing farm to school to producers. and really setting the stage for understanding both the demand for local food and school meals, as well as the benefits for producers in selling to school markets. So a big part of the introduction is providing an opportunity for seasoned producers to share their success stories with Farm to School to participants in your training. So we'll talk about this more later, but this is where customization of the module really comes in. So finding those local producers in your state, doing this work to share their stories. This module also introduces the concept of how producers can use goal setting and action planning to support their efforts in selling to schools. So materials needed include those farm to school success stories with local producers and the school business action planning guide. So that action planning guide is found in Appendix A of the producer workbook. You don't need to turn there yet. We'll be looking at that more closely later today. But just know that those are the two pieces of materials that are listed in the introduction curriculum outline. So in this list of the introduction background, that's listed right under the curriculum outline on page 18 in the facilitator guide. You'll see this in every single module. And for the introduction, this includes, again, those core elements of Farm to School, benefits of Farm to School for producers, and goal setting and action planning. And so if you need a refresher for any of the core concepts that are listed for a module, you want to check out those digging deeper into core concepts that's listed under the background info, which include a short list of resources to support you in preparing for delivering this content. So those can be accessed either by clicking the hyperlink if you're viewing digitally, or by looking them up in Appendix A of the Facilitator Guide, which starts on page 108. So the background section is also where you will find links to download the slide deck for the module. So that image is shown here, and you can see that on page 19 of the Facilitator Guide. This is an editable file available for you to adapt as necessary. And so for the introduction, again, it's on page 19. These slide decks are also individually accessible on the facilitators page of the website. The list of case studies that will appear in the module are included in the background info as well. So for the introduction, we have included a podcast conversation between a school bio, Natomas School District, and a small producer, Fiery Ginger Farm, both located in California, sharing their perspectives on the importance of building and maintaining relationships when it comes to farm to school. So you can see that listed on page 19 of the facilitator guide as well. And just remember, the full set of case studies can be found on our website. So lastly, the background information includes key terms for each module. You'll notice that as we get into modules 1 through 4, there's a Jeopardy game option to support producers as they learn these new terms. And Lacey will talk a little bit more about the Jeopardy game when we get to module 1. And just as a reminder, Tammy mentioned this yesterday, but a full list of key terms and acronyms from all the modules is on page 105 of the facilitator guide and page 62 of the producer workbook. So that's an overview of what you'll really see at the beginning of each module in the facilitator guide and producer workbook, as well as what's specifically in the introduction. So before I start digging into the slide deck, I just wanted to pause and check and see if there are any questions about what you're going to see at the beginning of each module. All right, well, if there's nothing yet, if you think of anything, please put in the chat. We can address it as we go along. So on our next slide here, just want to make sure we're all on the same page. We're on page 19 of the facilitator guide. This is slide 2. This is the very first slide in the introduction after the title slide. And it's intended to contextualize the individual producer training you'll be hosting in your state within the broader training program objectives. So this is a goal that you're probably already familiar with, hopefully, but producers may be hearing for the first time. And so for the overall objectives for the training as an entire program is really to increase producers' knowledge and understanding of farm to school, increase participation in farm to school activities, and increase the amount of local foods that producers sell to schools. So there are more specific learning objectives, as we've already seen, embedded in each module. And we'll look at more closely what those are for the introduction in a moment. And just another note about format. So you'll notice each slide in the facilitator guide has talking points for you. And as we go through these modules today and tomorrow, we will be pulling from these talking points and summarizing them where necessary. We won't be reading these verbatim. And we really encourage folks to read through each module and each module's talking points before delivering the trainer. And just as a reminder, you can make any necessary adjustments to the slides and talking points, as well as adding in your own regionalization and customization. It's also these talking points that have been translated into producer-friendly language in the producer workbook. So that text should align as you go through. All right. Moving on to look at slides 3 and 4. So we're going to hear a lot more about how to conduct evaluations for your trainings on Thursday of this week from NYU. I did want to point out, though, that when you are hosting your training and you're using the introduction slide decks, it's these slides that will prompt you to initiate that pre-training survey. And this will really be before you're getting into any content, right? So during your framing of the pre-training survey, it's really important to emphasize that you hope producers will help with evaluating the training, which will ultimately improve future trainings for their fellow peers in your state, while also looking at the overall impact of the training. So for example, a producer's readiness to sell to schools. So it's important to convey that early on. And similarly, you will be prompted to do a post-training survey during the conclusion of the modules, which we'll look at tomorrow. You do have access to additional guidance about the evaluation protocol in Appendix D, which is shown, a screenshot of that is shown on the right side of the screen here. It's on page 131 of the facilitator guide, and that is for in-person trainings. You also have an updated evaluation protocol for virtual trainings in your workshop materials folder. And I would just note that if you have any questions about evaluations at this point, just please write them down and save them for that session with NYU on Thursday, because they're going to have all the answers for you. But just wanted to make note of that since it is shows up here in the introduction. All right. So if we're following along in the facilitator guide, we'll turn the page to page 20. You'll see a list of the learning objectives for the introduction. And the introduction really just aims to support producers in gaining that sort of general understanding of what farm to school is and how it can benefit them, help them identify their motivations for selling to schools and consider how their sort of overall farm goals align with those motivations and values. And lastly, to introduce that concept of action planning. So producers may be really familiar with goal setting and use some sort of informal or formal goal setting process, but the introduction really introduces that concept and the tool, the action planning guide that I mentioned earlier, that they'll be using throughout the training. So these objectives are listed on that slide 5. They're also listed in the simplified curriculum outline for producers in their workbook on page 2. So the first activity that you'll be doing with producers is an icebreaker. And as you can see in the facilitator guide on slide 6, the facilitator prompt really recommends that you provide producers with an index card to write down their icebreaker answers. And depending on the size of the group, this may look a couple different ways. You may be able to have the whole group share some of their answers, or you may be able to break into smaller groups and share, or even turn it into a little bit more of an involved networking opportunity and do a handful of speed dating rounds where producers can connect with other participants 1 to 2 minutes at a time before moving on to the next person. So again, there's a lot of different ways this can look, but we really just want producers make sure they're connecting with each other early on in the training and beginning to articulate their why. So if I would just say if you have any go-to icebreakers that you use during trainings, especially with producers, let us know in the chat and we'll have an opportunity to share those later as well. So we do recommend collecting the index cards at the end and just of the activity and review them when you have a moment early on in the training to make sure you're able to sort of weave in those the answers to their questions and make sure that you're meeting their expectations and goals as best you can. Great. So let's look at the first content area that starts on page 20 still, slide 7. And this is looking at sort of introducing what farm to school is to producers. And again, this is an area where depending on the familiarity with farm to school among the producer audience, you may adapt this so that it is relevant to your group. And what you'll see is that in the producer workbook on page 3, this is really where it starts to get into what those core elements of farm to school are. And we want producers to have a general sense about these 3 aspects, where they can potentially plug in outside of local procurement if they're interested and able, and emphasize that the benefits of farm to school that they'll be learning about, whether it's related to kids, communities, and farmers, those really have a synergistic and reinforcing impact with one another. And so what you'll see is described in the talking points at the top of page 21 of the Facilitator Guide, is that we really want producers to know that farm to school is unique in every community, and that the training you've planned has been designed and customized with their specific needs and potential products in mind. So the producer workbook does go on to provide a general overview for producers about the demand and interest of local food being purchased and served in school meals, including the number of school districts participating in farm to school, as well as the monetary investment in local communities via these programs. So that's all on page 3 of the producer workbook. And this is where we want to have producers to start thinking about how their own goals may align with selling to schools, and see that school districts sort of see what the motivations are on the school district side in serving local food and purchasing local food, so that they see that schools are interested in supporting local farmers. They're interested in increasing school meal quality and school meal program participation. They're interested in increasing kids' willingness to try new fruits and vegetables. And they know that doing this also supports school wellness policies and broader school board priorities. So those are just some of the motivations that we see from the school district side, which we think can help producers sort of identify their own motivations for selling to schools as well. And then lastly, on slide 10 in this group, slide 10 illustrates the ways in which schools may partner with local farms and food businesses, and gives producers that sense of the variety of ways they can engage with schools and the interconnected benefits. So for example, participating in a special school event or hosting a taste testing can result in an increase in sales from school districts, as well as families and the broader community as well. So that's really intended to give producers that general sense of what farm to school is and where those opportunities are. And then the next section goes into those benefits of farm to school for producers a little bit more closely. It's also an opportunity for producers that you're training to hear from other producers in your state that are already experienced in farm to school and have a lot to share there. So there's a couple different regionalization opportunities that I'll highlight in this section. So you'll see in slides 12 and 13, so this is on both page 21 and turning over to page 22 in the Facilitator Guide, as well as still at the bottom of page 3 of the Producer Workbook. So this includes a little bit of information about the financial impact and benefit of farm to school for producers, such as an increase in income from farm to school sales, establishment of long-term revenue streams for individual producers, increase in market diversification, as well as just overall economic growth. So we want producers to take away that selling to schools and participating in farm to school programming may benefit them either directly through increased sales to schools, or indirectly through a diversified marketing strategy. So for example, marketing that can occur to students and families through the cafeteria and school events, or farmers being able to use some of their promotional materials for farmers markets and restaurants as well. And this section also includes a snapshot of ways that farm to school may align with their farm goals, such as nourishing kids with local fresh produce. They may be interested in promoting agriculture as a career pathway for youth in their community, and even just increasing the visibility of small and mid-sized farms in their community as well. So you'll see the little star here and it says regionalization opportunities. So you'll see those kind of sprinkled throughout today and tomorrow. So this is an opportunity to highlight economic impact data on producers selling to schools in your state if you have it. It's also an opportunity to share farm to school participation data in your state. And this is really where the contextualizing the benefits for producers in their actual locale can be really helpful to sort of see where they can plug in. And we have built time into our state breakout teams today and this week to really brainstorm how you can localize and customize your training to be relevant to your producer audience. So if you're having ideas come up already, just jot them down in your trainer action plan and we'll have more opportunities to share as a state team. So similarly, if we move on to the next section here, this is another great regionalization opportunity. And these are slides 14 through 16 at the bottom of page 22 on the facilitator guide. These are intended to be a spot for participants, so the producers you're training, to really hear from a producer about their experience in launching or expanding farm to school sales. This may take the form of a small share out and discussion with a farm to school farmer champion in your state, or could be a former or current USDA farm to school grantee. You could also show a video of a producer sharing their farm to school story. And just to note that, the quotes that are on these slides, they are real sharings from real farmers, but they're ultimately meant to be placeholders. We really want the intro to be as engaging and interactive as possible. So in addition to planning a farm to school panel and a site visit, we encourage each state training team to generate a list of producers in your state that may be willing to pop in and share their story with other producers in an informal setting, or do a Q&A with producers that you're training, or maybe even who have some pre-recorded content to share. So again, we have dedicated breakout time to brainstorm about this together this week during our Make It Local activities that are coming up later today specifically. And if there are, again, any ideas that are coming to mind, make sure to write them in your trainer action plan to discuss later with your group. So I'm going to pause there again for a moment and see if there are any questions or thoughts at this point, and then we'll look at the last two sections of the introduction. Okay, take a sip of water real quick. Great. So there's the first two sections of the introduction are really around what is farm to school and what are the benefits, and how can we highlight and do some localization and highlight some success stories around farm to school. And then the second two sections are about digging deeper into what are the producers' goals around selling to schools, and how those goals can then sort of support the action planning that they'll be doing throughout the training. So the How Farm Goals Support Farm to School Sales section introduces the School Business Action Planning Guide resource that producers will be using throughout the training. And goal setting, action planning, it really is supposed to help producers assess how their lifestyles, their farm landscape, their mission can really frame their market selection. And producers will review their goals and how these relate to farm to school. And this type of goal setting is referred to as whole farm goal setting, but the concept does not need to be further covered for the purposes of this training. And if you're interested in getting more familiar with whole farm goal setting to prep for your training, you can see the Digging Deeper into Core Concepts resources that I referenced earlier, which are at the beginning of the introduction on page 18 of the Facilitator Guide, or in the Facilitator Guide's Appendix A. So just know that extra info is there, but the basic info you need are in the slides. So you can see in this graphic here, the 4 circles, this is on page 4. So we're flipping to page 4 in the producer workbook. And that aligns with slide 18 in the Facilitator Guide. This begins to walk producers through thinking about how their goals, both on and off the farm, really align or may align with selling to schools. So the diagram shown illustrates those interconnected variables that shape a producer's farm goals as they relate to school sales, including lifestyle goals, community assets, marketing and profitability of their farm or business, and their production capabilities. So producers are going to spend some time reflecting on these variables and which of them may relate to their goals and motivations for selling to schools at the end of the introduction. We encourage trainers at this point to really start the conversation by asking producers if they have some sort of business plan in place, and just get them thinking about it from that perspective and how these variables may impact their decision to sell to schools. So next, you'll be guiding with that sort of framework in mind. You'll be guiding producers through taking the school business assessment. And so this assessment is introduced to producers on pages 4 and 5 of their workbook. And you can see that's on slide 19 of the Facilitator guide. And this assessment is pulled right out of the School Business Action Planning Guide, which we'll look at more closely in a moment. But similar to the Trainer Action Plan Assessment Checklist for trainers that we looked at yesterday, this School Business Assessment will help producers identify areas that will be important to think about and plan for as they move through your training. So it's really used to identify gaps in their skills and resources they need before selling to schools. And of course, helps identify their strengths as well. So what you see on the screen right here is an example assessment of what it would look like after it's filled out. And you can see it's categorized by the module topics in the producer training curriculum, including goals, which is covered in the introduction, child nutrition programs, which is module 1, selling to schools, which is module 2, product identification, which is module 3, and growing for schools, which is module 4. So this sample that's been filled out shows that this farmer feels confident in their abilities to grow for schools and what their goals are. So that's where the space is filled in green on the web. But they need support related to better understanding child nutrition programs and actually how to sell to schools. So that's where the web is empty in this example. So this is a perfect candidate for this type of training, right? And that's really what you're trying to support producers in identifying at this stage, where those gaps are, and then how the training can support them. So that's going over the assessment. And once you've talked through the example, you'll prompt them to take 5 to 8 minutes to turn to page 53 in their workbook and fill out the assessment. So that's on that next slide there. And if you, we'll take a minute to all turn to page 53 in our producer workbook so you can see where producers would be navigating to. So again, you can see that sample is right above there on page 52, and then the actual web, that assessment that you want them to fill out, is on page 53. So each category is arranged by those topic areas for the curriculum, as I mentioned, right? And the scoring is on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being little to no skills or resources, and 5 indicating strong skills and ample resources for that topic area. And so these instructions are right at the top of page 53 in the producer workbook. They're also outlined in slide 19 on page 23 of the facilitator guide. So at this point, this is, again, you'll be asking producers to fill out this sample assessment and help them identify those strengths and gaps. All right. So for the last section of the introduction, we're going to think about now how we support producers in taking that assessment and starting to build out their action plan. So producers will leave the training with the school business action plan for accessing school markets. And the plan is really intended to provide producers with tangible next steps for selling to schools, and really make sure that it's sort of rooted in that farm goal-based decision making. So you'll see throughout the curriculum that we've built in time at the conclusion of each module for producers to fill in their school business action plan in real time as they're going through your training. And just as of note, it may be useful to provide action plan samples to demonstrate that variability among producers related to product scales and farm to school experience. So just to orient ourselves again, we're still on pages 52 and 53 of the producer workbook. And I just wanted to note that the action planning guide as a separate resource is available on the website to download on the producers page of the website. So it's easily accessible, printable, something you can share with producers if you're not able to have the full workbook in front of them. So the first two pages of the action planning guide is the web assessment, which you see here. And if you turn to page 54, which is on the next slide, this is the checklist assessing the benefits of farm to school that interest producers and what support they need to achieve farm to school related goals. So this checklist, you can see this aligns with, if you turn to page 24 in the facilitator guide, you'll see it's that slide 21. Again, it's also on page 54 of the producer workbook. And at this point, you'll be introducing the idea of action planning and SMART goals. And you'll want to prompt producers to take about 10 minutes to fill out the questions on page 54 in their workbook. And this is really a culmination of the thinking that they've been doing this module about benefits, motivations, and goals. So just to recap, at the end of the introductions, producers will have filled out both the school business assessment, which was on page 53, and the benefits of farm to school checklist, which is shown here on page 54 of the producer workbook. And so ideally at this point, producers can move forward with this info, right? So these identified strengths, gaps, benefits, and goals to help them navigate the training and identify those short-term strategies and long-term goals related to selling to schools. And I would just add too that, for additional support for preparing in this on this topic around action planning, you can visit the Digging Deeper into Core Concepts resources that are on page 18 of the facilitator guide, as well as the How to Use Action Planning recorded training that's accessible on the website that Tammy pointed out for us yesterday. So there's a lot of different support for the action planning concept. And like I said, we'll be looking at that consistently through every module today and tomorrow. And so this is really where you'll see the content for the introduction ending. But I did want to just, before we moved on to questions in module 1, wanted to provide a little sneak peek about the rest of the action plan because it will continue to come out through all the modules. So you'll see, on the next slide, and on page 55 of the producer workbook, this is the list of those end of module check-in questions. And this is where you'll guide producers to come back to at the end of every module to complete a quick check-in around the module objectives. And as I mentioned, as NFSN and NCAT team members sort of go through the rest of the modules this week, we'll continue to see the end of module check-ins prompt producers to revisit their action plan. And those check-ins are really intended to be a jumping off point so that producers can then add in those short-term strategies, immediate next steps, and timelines for each module and content area in the actual action plan table, which starts on page 56. So if you turn to page 56, you'll see the action plan table starts with module 1, and then each page after that is a separate module. So module 2 is on page 57. Module 3 is on 58, module 4 is on page 59. So there's that table for each module there. And if you turn to page 61, this is sort of a summary table for the action plan, and we'll revisit this together during the conclusion tomorrow. But that's really a place where we're sort of tying all the pieces together for producers and synthesizing what those next steps are for them when they leave the training. So with that, I will pause for any questions that may have come up for this last section. I know that's it's sort of the introduction introduces a lot of different content and the tools that the producers will be using. So while it is a shorter module, it is one that I think we recommend spending some time with so that producers can really familiarize themselves with the school business action planning guide, because it will continue to be a really useful resource for the whole training. Yeah, I see Annalisa's question about adding deleting material from slides. To what extent can we modify these? Yeah, so we created this curriculum to sort of be as provide as much breadth as we could to be supportive, but are really encouraging state teams to modify as necessary. We know that every producer audience is going to look different. The needs are going to be different. So I think, yeah, and that's why we've included the slide decks as being downloadable editable files. You know, take out the slides you don't need, add in your own slides to really provide that context that's relevant for your particular producer audience. Yeah, so another question about time of module presentation. So every if you go back to the beginning of each module or just the pages, I think 11 through 17, where it has a list of all those curriculum outlines, you can see an estimated time for completion of each module. And again, this is an estimated time, and certainly depends on, for instance, you know, how much time you might give to spotlighting local producer stories, or how much time, you know, if you have an audience that's very new to farm to school, then that might take a little longer than a group could kind of skip ahead through the introduction. So that is generally the estimated times are provided in each one of the curriculum outlines, but certainly that will depend on and what you decide to include or remove for that. And how do you think about branding for adaptation? That is a great question that I don't know if I have the answer to around branding. I'm not sure who would be best to answer that. We can also hold that and make sure we bring that answer to you tomorrow or Thursday. We'll make note of that. My guess would be that it's just additive. So, but we'll make sure to get that answer for you. Yeah, are there any other questions around?
Hey, Jenny Lee.
Yeah.
Lori also had a question about how much time to allow for completion of the worksheets.
Yeah, I mean, we give sort of time estimations as well in the talking points in terms of when we're sort of prompting trainers to support producers in completing worksheets. I think it's going to vary a bit by the worksheet. I'm not as familiar with how long some of the worksheets in general might take in other modules, but in the introduction, you know, we suspect, I think we recommended 10 minutes for the assessment, 10 minutes for the benefits checklist. And again, that's going to just depend on the support level that folks might need, how familiar they are, if they have a business plan, if they've thought about some of these things beforehand. So I know we've heard some recommendations as well around, you know, how can you sort of prep producers before the training, you know, ask them to bring in their business plan, et cetera. So they've sort of thought about some of these pieces so that the assessment and benefits checklist is easier to get through. So I think there's a couple different ways to streamline that process, but I think it is going to depend on the group that you have a little bit. Yeah, Tammy, I don't know if you have general thoughts about the other. I know there are a lot more worksheets in the other modules as well. So.
Yeah, I think, you know, we just have that guidance in the facilitator prompts of all the activities and the worksheets. So, but it does really depend on how many producers you have in your audience and if you're doing, you know, kind of breakout groups and all of those things. But so it's just a general guideline. That's where I would recommend that you start though.
Great. Well, I feel free to continue to ask questions in the chat as they come up. And I will go ahead and um, I think we have about a 5-minute break. I haven't been keeping up with the time. 10 minutes? Okay, 10-minute break. Sounds great. So we'll be back at 1:30 Central Time. Thanks, y'all.
Well, we're back. I hope everybody got something to drink and is feeling refreshed and ready for our next modules. So we're going to jump into module 1, which is getting to know school markets. And so we're really focused in this module around what producers need to know about school food programs. I just want to remind everybody again, as Jenny Lee stated, that this curriculum, the slide decks, the content is really customizable for you. And we recognize that there may be differences in how much you feel the producers that you're working with need to know about school programs and markets. And we've provided a lot of information so you can be selective about the information that you want to prioritize. And our goal throughout this section is to really help producers understand that perspective of the school buyer and provide them with the information they need to have that shared conversation and have that shared language. And so producers really understand the needs of the school buyer and how their products can fit those needs. So those are our big picture objectives when we're looking at getting to know the school market in the training. So to orient everybody to where we are in our materials, in your facilitator guide, that yellow one, remember, we are on page 25. That's going to be the start of module 1 for your facilitator guide. And then in your producer workbook, the producer content starts on page 6. So those formats should be getting pretty familiar to you with the training outlines and with that getting started materials. And then of course, you'll find online that module 1 slide deck. You can find it with all the sets of slide decks on the facilitator training tools. So let's take a quick overview of the module 1 outline. So in looking at this module 1 outline, you'll see this training is designed, this section of the training is designed to take about an hour, depending on the number of optional activities that you include. We have a number of optional activities here that you can plug and play and utilize which ones make the most sense for the producers that you're working with. We've got 3 sections here. Oh, and I'll also mention there is that optional content estimated to take about 20 minutes, and that's the CACFP and Summer Food Service module. So we've got those 3 sections. We've got the Child Nutrition Program section, the Local Food Sourcing and Procurement section, and then that optional Module C section. And as you can see here again, we've got listed those brief outlines, the objectives, and of course, all of the training activities and materials that are associated with each of those different sections. So just briefly noting all of the resources that you have in that introductory section of your facilitator guide. So we've got the core concepts. For this section, our core concepts are really focused around identifying and understanding the diversity and the requirements related to child nutrition programs, and understanding the food procurement process and how that affects producers and how that affects producer sales. You'll also see in your facilitator guide, we've got those digging deeper into core concepts sections. So if you are looking for more information on this, you want to be a little more proficient when you're presenting the information and reference a few more materials, you can dive into those digging deeper materials for trainers. We've got a number of amazing case studies that were developed in conjunction with this section that really highlight that connection between producers and school programs. Those are listed there. And again, of course, all those case studies are on the website that Tammy shared with us yesterday. We've got key terms, a significant list of key terms here, because again, we're developing that shared language through this section. And then facilitator tips. So those are just reminders for you as a facilitator of things to keep at your top of your mind as you're moving through this section. So jumping into the module content itself and how you might approach presenting it at your local producer training. So let's start by looking at those learning objectives for producers. So at the end of this module, our aim for producers is to understand the scope and diversity of child nutrition programs and understand them as a market opportunity for their products. We want them to understand how child nutrition programs plan menus, process foods, and prepare meals, so then they can better understand what the needs of those programs are and how their products might fit those needs. And of course, understanding those basic regulations governing school food and procurement and how that's going to impact the potential for child nutrition programs to purchase and how they purchase. So they can kind of understand that basic understanding of how they can communicate with child nutrition programs. So our first launch activity in this section, as you noted, there are a lot of different terms, right? There's a lot of terms when it comes to school food and child nutrition programs that producers may be unfamiliar with. So we've got that amazing glossary that has really extensive in-depth information. And then we also recommend at the beginning of each module to launch with this Jeopardy game. So in your facilitator guide and in the slide set, you see really specific directions on how to create your own Jeopardy game with these fun words and to make it a little more interactive for producers to start to understand those words and get a shared conversation and shared dialogue around some of those important vocabulary words that they're going to see coming back and over. And you can see here on slide 3, that's where you see kind of that sample and what it might look like and instructions for how to create your PowerPoint Jeopardy quiz. So again, the more ways that we can get producers talking to one another and interacting, this is a great way to jump off. So after we have kind of our getting started discussions and our Jeopardy game, we're going to launch into section A, which is around child nutrition programs. So we're going to highlight a lot of different opportunities for you to identify state and regional customization throughout. As Jenny Lee mentioned, we're going to be talking a lot about where the specific information about your state or about your region community can be elevated. And the first opportunity is with this opening slide. So we really want to start by emphasizing to producers the market opportunity for child nutrition programs in your state. And so you can see here, we've got this slide for you to fully customize by featuring a picture of farm to school in your state, by highlighting the number of children served in your state through child nutrition programs, really demonstrating that potential reach. And we've got here even links and regionalization tips to help you find this information for your state. So we want to start by really centering and uplifting the opportunities for farm to school and local food sales happening within your state or locale. So after we start by kind of centering folks and what the opportunities are in our community, we recommend that you provide a video, a farm to school in action video, so producers can really see what this looks like and what it looks like in schools. And I'm going to share a sample here. We're going to share a sample from Michigan. We do recommend that you keep it, if possible, regionally specific, because there are a lot of opportunities. If you have videos from your state, you have videos from kind of your region, it's great to be able to feature some local farmers to make it feel even more applicable. So let's take a look at this video from Michigan. What I'd love for you to notice, this is about a specific program, but what I really like about this video is that it features both the farmer and the school food service and their different perspectives. And then we also get to kind of get a glance, of course, of what it looks like to be offering these foods to kids in meals and their perspective too. So I'm going to do some screen sharing magic.
When we applied for our first loan from Hoop Houses for Health for a hoop house that cost $10,000, we at that point in our business would never have taken out a loan for that amount of money, even for something that was going to increase our bottom line and allow us to sell year-round and sell to schools, things that we really wanted to do. We just wouldn't have been able to pull the trigger on that big of a loan. We might not have even gotten approved for a loan like that. And now, as a result of having these hoop houses, we're able to pay that back by giving away food to kids in schools and to moms who are participating in these programs. Those are relationships that we want to have, but because of the fact of money, they're very difficult to get off the ground in the first place. Additionally, it pushed our business forward in a way that we wouldn't have done ourselves, even though we had dreams for exactly this type of thing when we got started.
I'm working with about 3 farmers right now, and they're bringing food, good quality, local food from the farms near here into the door of the kitchen at no cost to me. It involves a little prep, a little cleaning, and then some straight serving. By distributing the Hoop Houses for Health products through the schools, we're reaching families that will otherwise not make it to a farmer's market. We're in a rural district. Kids aren't going to walk to the farmer's market. They're not going to ride their bikes. In many cases, their parents can't take them. So by getting it into the schools, then we can at least be assured that they're getting access to fresh, local, healthful, nutrient-dense ingredients 5 days a week. It's been absolutely the best program that I work with.
All right, so hopefully you got a little view of just the opportunity to show some of those localized programs, to show some of those localized farmers and food service directors, and show how they work together, and also get a view of what these delicious meals will look like in school food service right now. So let me reshare my slides here, and we'll keep moving through our content. So after we view a video, our next activity, and again, we just really want to get producers engaged and connecting with one another and thinking through what is school food and what does it look like right now. So our next activity is to think about our school meal memories. So we want producers to think about, what do you think of when you think of school food? What is your first memory of a school food meal? So I'm going to ask all of you to take a moment to look back in your mind. What do you think about when you think about school food? And add that to the chat box. I notice a theme of squares. Square pizza, square fish. So even in what we're hearing from you all, there's a big diversity, right? Some people are saying scratch cooking and they have these really warm memories. And some people are remembering those square foods or those two cooked vegetables or those mushy Brussels sprouts. And so what we're going to talk about with producers is that school food now, it can look different. And we saw these amazing meals that we saw in the video, and that we have school food that are really prioritizing those appetizing, fresh foods, and their products can be an important part of making those meals really fresh and delicious and encouraging children to be a part of these school meal programs. So we just want to get producers really thinking about that opportunity and the positive attributes of our school food programs. So after we kind of start this brainstorming, have producers thinking together and sharing, then we're going to jump into that overview of child nutrition programs. So in this section, we're going to orient producers to what school meals look like now, that they're delicious and they can be full of local food. So in this section, we kind of break down the language and the programs we'll be discussing. So we know that child nutrition programs is not a very farmer-friendly term. So here we really want to articulate this transition that after this, we're going to be talking about school food programs. And we articulate a little bit of a difference between the school food programs we're thinking about that are traditionally served in our K through 12 school systems. And that's really kind of the language we're going to be using and focusing on throughout the rest of the training, but also point out that there are other child nutrition program meal opportunities. And then we have that additional module in Appendix C focused on the child and adult care food program and summer food service programs. So while most of this training is focused on these K through 12 school food buyers, there are these other opportunities that we want to make sure that producers know about. And if it's of interest and you think a prime spot for other producers, then all right, I do see some chatter in the chat box and we'll come back to that. But I'm not sure that I have time to read it all right now, but we'll come back to that for sure. So let's keep moving a little bit and then we'll come back to comments and questions. So after we kind of talk about understanding these different meal programs, we're going to look a little bit about school meal programs by the numbers and these kind of key players. So again, we want to talk about the reach, the opportunity for reach for school meal programs, how many folks are being impacted and how many children are having these opportunities to be fed by these meal programs. And then we also want to look at the key players from federal to local. So, you know, when we have these producers together, they are focusing on, we're at a USDA training, right? We're at a training that has been supported by the national USDA. You as a state agency representative are likely there providing information and resources, but then we're also supporting producers and being able to talk to school food service representatives. So we want to be able to reiterate those different roles and help these players and how they can benefit and support producers. All right, so let's take a pause. I know we've got a couple of questions in the chat box. Let's see, I saw one about the Annalise's cost around the Michigan directors. So that I think is a specific Hoop Houses for Health program that they were a part of. And I don't know if folks from Michigan have any additional information about that.
I can share a little bit about it from my own knowledge. It was a state-run grant program out of MSU, Hoop Houses for Health, and it was a really successful project. They were really able to get a lot of funding to different small farms and get access to these hoop houses, and it was really strong in the farm to school and farm to institution movement. I'm pretty certain that the funding has ended at the state level, but it was one of those kind of groundbreaking regional examples that really is celebrated because it allowed farmers the opportunity to extend their harvest. So again, it was a state level grant. There you go. Someone just threw something in the chat there. So you can double check my facts on that too, but I believe again, they're not doing the program anymore. But if you click on the link that Rachel shared, we can find out if it's still in action or not.
Thanks so much, Jen and Rachel.
Lacey, as a farmer myself, I want to throw in that watching that video made me feel like I have to give my produce away to the schools, and the schools were celebrating that they had got this produce for free. And I was like, why would they show this video? And so I'm just going to throw that out there as a caution in the wind. Like, I don't know, it brought a lot of feels. If you're going to show something like that, perhaps having a conversation about what that would be beneficial.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, absolutely. And we should have provided more context. Then we would never, ever promote an expectation of producers giving away their food for free. And absolutely, thank you for that feedback. And we will certainly be more cautious about that. And yeah, and as we go through, we will, identify that is not the expectation that producers are giving anything away. And yeah, thank you for flagging that.
It was mentioned on both sides too. Like the school talked about how it was for free and the farmer talked about how they were giving it away. So it was like, yeah, like that's the way it should be at farm to school. And that's not how it should be. Producers deserve to be paid. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you. And that was just a specific program. And we really appreciate you flagging that. And that is something we will definitely build in with caution.
I will also just say that there are lots of other videos and case studies that focus on the price point piece, and definitely encourage you folks to look at the podcasts and videos, because we got that loud and clear in the needs assessment. So it is mentioned quite a bit throughout the curriculum.
Great. And I also just want to uplift Jean's comment around the need for systems and need for infrastructure for producers to be able to sell to market. And I certainly agree, Jane. I don't know if you want to speak more to that. I think we know that there is a need on all sides. We know that school food service needs support and infrastructure. We know that we need this broader food systems infrastructure, and that supporting producers is just one small piece. We know that is not enough to make all the change we want to make and that there are other opportunities to help identify all of those other places. And we certainly agree that there is more need for infrastructure, and this is just a small piece of a much larger puzzle.
Yeah, I guess I can just say that, you know, in Minnesota, we're talking about training of farmers and observing that the training that our farmers need is at a more basic level than what's in this curriculum, and that a lot of the things in this curriculum would be really useful to the community level organizers who have been trying to work with school districts. You know, I've had a front row seat since 2015 with some rural school districts, and this kind of information is what the local SHIP coordinator, statewide health improvement program coordinator, needed to know, and kind of had to do a whole bunch of legwork on her own to figure it out about 5, 6 years ago to get a program up and running. So this would have been super useful to her at that point. And yeah, I guess I wonder what your expectations are for what a farmer would be able to do in approaching a school on their own without that kind of backup from a local organizer who could help do some of the, you know, running of interference, I guess, between all the needs that the school district might articulate and what the farmers might be able to deal with.
Sure, and I think, you know, we hope that we've built the training to show those different options. You know, we certainly, especially wanting to be able to implement at that state level, want those localized resources, those state resources, those third parties who are doing and have the capacity to build those connections to be featured and elevated and make those relationships. And we also want to create opportunities for farmers to better understand what that market looks like and help to kind of think about and make those decisions. So, you know, I hope that we are offering kind of different options for producers and for community partners to work together, and giving them some tools to be able to make those decisions about how they might want to approach it. And I welcome the other project partners to kind of jump in on that as well.
I will, I'll just jump in just because we're only in module 1 and we're in kind of, I feel like one of the more dense pieces in terms of approachability to producers. So, and I think Lacey's done a great job at kind of explaining child nutrition programs at the producer level. But yeah, we, you know, modules 2, 3, and 4 really focus on the pathway and how to get that product into schools based on school infrastructure and all of those pieces. So I will just say that, yeah, we need to hold tight because there are a lot of details that help producers enter in where based on the school's capability.
Thanks, Tammy, and thanks everybody for your conversation and dialogue. And you know, as Tammy said, this is our first regional facilitator workshop, and so we are happy to be able to work with you to know what's most helpful and appreciate your feedback and the conversation. So with that, though, we do have a lot of content to cover, and hopefully some of that content will start to answer those questions about expectations and more opportunities. So I'm going to keep moving and continue through module 1. So just to kind of recap where we've been, we've really kind of introduced these ideas around school food. We are kind of looking at what the different programs are and kind of where we're focusing this conversation. We've talked a little bit about some of the key players, which includes a lot of opportunities for that regionalization, to talk about who those partners are, those potential partners could be, and who are the players within farm to school within your state or region. And then we're going to dive in a little bit more to what determines what those school food programs, how are they making their decisions? And we know a couple of those key areas that are helping determine their decisions are around the meal pattern and the nutrition requirements that they have to adhere to, and the costs that they're working with and within. So we're going to talk very briefly, and we show just very briefly, I look at what are these school meal patterns and the requirements. And the aim of doing that is so producers can see what products that they might have are already going to be desirable to school food programs based on the requirements that they have around serving. So, really thinking about those vegetable subgroups, for instance, why might sweet potatoes be particularly desirable? Because schools have to adhere to this red-orange subgroup. Or leafy greens, why might kale be a good fit for our school district because they have these opportunities or these needs to adhere to these school meal requirements? So we shared briefly around the school meal requirements so producers can start thinking about what might be a good fit for their potential school sales. And then we asked them to kind of reflect on that, to start to think about what are the products that they already have. Based on that conversation, what are the products that might be a good fit for their school meal programs? And again, just more opportunities for producers to be reflective, to be thinking about what they're already doing that could be a good fit and that they could roll into opportunities for sales with schools. So after some reflection time, give folks a chance to pause and maybe share information back and forth and have some dialogue. We're going to do a little bit about kind of the meal costs. And, the aim in addressing this with this producers is both to be realistic about what schools are working with and kind of what their expectations and how they're having to adhere to meal costs, but also to kind of demonstrate that these small numbers can add up and that we're looking at a lot of volume and that schools do have a lot of purchasing power when it comes to purchasing for their school meal programs. So after we kind of cover those two areas, that's kind of what are those big kind of determining factors of what school buyers are thinking about, their food, their nutrition requirements, and the meal costs that they're trying to balance. We take a little bit of a look into the diversity of school meal programs. And so here we're thinking about really the broad range of school meal programs and how it might take some time to identify the right type of program, the right size of program that can be a good fit for producers. So in that, we're really thinking about volume of product. So this is a sample chart that's featured in Facilitator Guide, pages 35 and 36 is where we are if we want to do some kind of reorienting back to our resources. So Facilitator Guide 35 and 36, and these are slides 21 through 24. So the purpose of this section is to really kind of hit home. There is a broad range of schools, and if you've seen one school kitchen or one school meal program, you've seen one school kitchen or one school meal program. There is this broad range. One might be a fit for you as a producer and others may not. So we really want to emphasize that there can be a fit regardless of your size, your scale, or your products, that there might be an opportunity. So here we kind of highlight the different potential different volume needs that a program might have based on whether they're serving younger children or whether they're serving high school children, whether they are utilizing it as a snack or whether they're utilizing it in their meal program. So there might be this variation in amounts that they need to purchase. So that can be matched with the scale that producers are able to produce. We also think about school meal program kitchens. And how some school meal programs are going to have the capacity to be able to cook from scratch. So bringing whole, fresh product is an option. Some school meal programs are going to have to need to use some pre-prepared or partially processed food. So thinking about that when you're having the dialogue with the producer, with the food service about what they have the capacity for and how that matches your capacity to provide product for them. And we do have another video here that kind of shows, it demonstrates some of the different features that you might see in a school kitchen program. And so I just want to kind of elevate the different aspects of the school kitchen that producers might be interested in. This might be an opportunity to point out, they might take a look at kind of the packaging that the product's coming in, save that for future reference, and also thinking about kind of the model. This also gives us an insight into the school food model and how that might vary. All right, I'm going to switch up our screen here again.
concept for children to be able to relate where the food they eat comes from and know that it's right within their own region. Well, when we first found out that collards were going to be available through the Farm to School program, thought back to my childhood, and every time my mom cooked collards, it was in the biggest pot that we had in the house. So I looked in the back of our cook chill department. I said, there's 2 huge pots. I bet we could cook collards in those. It was a little trial and error at first, getting the seasoning right. And of course the staff was a little wary at first. But if there's one constant, it's going to be change. We're going to be challenged and required to do new things, and that's a good thing because we are creating change in our children's dietary habits and improving them. So if we expect our kids to improve, then we've got to do the same.
They good. They look good. Very good, Sheree. They're ready to go.
We think that by creating demand, we can also help stimulate the supply. That's one of the largest barriers that we have, is strictly being able to get the supply at the level that we would use.
1 case of sweet peas, 1 case, 3 cans of mixed fruit, 4 bags of pears. Badler.
What's unique about us is we do deliver groceries and supplies to every school every day.
4 bags of collard greens.
That's about 22,000 lunches and close to 9,000 breakfasts a day.
2 cucumbers.
What we deliver today is served in the school the next day. Strawberries, watermelons, kids really like. But to get them to try the vegetables takes a little more encouragement sometimes. We found that it really helps to work with other stakeholders in the farm to school and agriculture industry. We're helping promote Food Corps and Cooperative Extension and North Carolina farmers. They're helping promote school lunch.
All right, so our aim there was to just so, there might be a lot of preconceived notions about what that school kitchen looks like. And it's a great opportunity to kind of demonstrate what happens in the background, how those products are going to be used, what capacity schools might have. Let's reshare here. Great. And we also saw in that video a lot about partnerships too, this kind of demonstration of how there are a lot of different key players and potential to be partnering across with those key players. And your training is an opportunity to kind of demonstrate how those players, whether that's extension, maybe you have extension partners on your training team, maybe you have programs like Food Corps within your community, and school food service and producers and producer organizations can be working together. So that's going to bring us to our next applied activity. So just to orient us back to our facilitator guide and producer workbook, in the facilitator guide on page 36, you will find this slide. We're on slide 25 here. And this corresponds to producer workbook. We're going to be on page 10 for this next activity. And so this activity is, again, an opportunity to be thinking about understanding those local school markets. What's the demand? What are schools buying? So this is an opportunity to take a look at that USDA census, the Farm to School census, acknowledging I know we're going to be getting new data really soon. So it may look a little bit different, but this is still a great opportunity. We're going to take a little practice moment. I'd love for folks to navigate to the Farm to School census page. I'm going to add that in the chat box here. What I want to ask producers to do is to really think about what is the demand and who is buying and what are they buying within their state. Or they can even drill down, if they know school districts around them, they can drill down and look at the school districts around them as well. So I'd love for folks to navigate to that page and just tell us that first question on our worksheet is around how much money is spent in local foods in your state. So you're going to navigate in that toolbar. I know a lot of you folks are probably old hand at navigating the USDA census data, but when you go to that site, you'll navigate to that top toolbar around Explore Data in your district, and you'll be able to select your state from that map. And I'd love for everybody to add in their chat box how much is being invested in local food in your state according to that survey. All right, we've got Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Minnesota. All right, looks like everybody found it. And then as you can see, in that producer workbook, as you flow through those questions, it's an opportunity for producers to dig a little bit deeper to think about what are the products that are in demand that folks are buying in the district. And this can even be a tool for identifying potential customers that are already purchasing and maybe purchasing local. So just another tool and resource and piece of information to equip producers with as they're considering this as a market. So that brings us to our section B around local food sourcing and procurement in meals. So our approach to this section, again, is to provide producers enough information to be able to understand the perspectives of potential school buyers and to understand the decision-making of the school buyers and the position, and to be able to have that conversation with them to understand one another. So we start out this section by looking at the farm-to-school supply chain. And again, in Module 2, Robert is going to really dig deep into these different supply chains and pathways. But again, this is just to kind of lay the foundation for producers to think about those different pathways and those different market pathways, and to build that foundation of knowledge as they go into later modules. And we're going to spend in this module just a little bit of time talking about those key players and opportunity to kind of reflect on producers to the pathways that they're already utilizing and how those might tie into farm to school. So after we get kind of a bigger sense of these farm to school supply chain pathways, we're going to talk just a little bit about sourcing and serving of local food in schools, just so producers know what this looks like and how that might impact what they sell to schools in their interest. So we're going to touch on why defining local might matter to them and how schools might define this idea of local. We're going to touch on how schools source local food. Again, we're going to deep dive into this in Module 2, but really just showing those different potential pathways and the different ways that schools are purchasing local food. And this is another opportunity for that regionalization conversation to talk about the distributors in your area, to talk about those potential food hubs or aggregators or the processors, and really share information about how folks are working together within your state or region. And then we touch a little bit on how schools incorporate local foods, including beyond those standard meal programs. This really ties back to the introductory section. And identifies those opportunities for really connections and building relationships with schools. And again, another great opportunity to feature Harvest of the Month programs, to feature your state plates, and to elevate those different programs that schools might be participating, and identify that those might be a pathway in developing relationship with schools. We heard on the panel yesterday that Katie started by purchasing food for Harvest of the Month, and then started to grow her purchasing and local purchasing through that program. So identifying these additional pathways to cultivating relationships. And you can see here, we've got these regionalization tips, as well as prompts to help you kind of guide that conversation for what producers should be thinking about when they're thinking about these opportunities. We also want to give producers a sense of timing when it comes to purchasing. So especially understanding the need to get to know your school buyer's schedule, when they might be making the decisions around school buying, and understand that there are certain cycles that they go through in purchasing and planning. This example may not be what it looks like within your state or your community, and this is certainly flexible. You can adapt to what you think your producers need to know. But we also want to highlight, when food service might be making decisions about purchasing, when they might be when producers can look for RFPs and expect those RFPs to come out, and also when they need to be in that relationship building process. When did we heard from Moses yesterday about he was having school food tours, he was talking to the school food service. They were starting that relationship so that when that RFP was released, he was ready for it and could make those decisions, based on an informed relationship and based on an informed conversation with those school food service directors. So this takes us to our next applied activity here. And this is, again, an optional activity, but one we'd encourage you to take time for, at least take a little time to give producers an opportunity to kind of peruse and get familiar with these case studies. So this is all about looking at the different attributes of school food programs and why or why not they would not make a good potential market opportunity. So in your facilitator guide, you can find the directions and facilitator instructions on page 40 on slide 32. And then in the producer workbook, you'll find the mini case studies for the activity on page 12 and 13. And then you'll find the associated worksheet with those prompt questions on page 14. So I'm just going to give everybody a minute to navigate to those pages. So these mini case studies are kind of abbreviated versions of those full case studies that you found on the website. And so the aim for this activity is for producers to take a chance to kind of read through, see what these relationships look like in action, and see why these examples make a good partnership and match, and why it's beneficial in these examples, both for the producer and for the schools. So we recommend in this activity that producers kind of break out into groups. That might be at the table that they're sitting at. You might put them in separate Zoom breakout rooms if you're doing virtual session, and they read one of these case studies and have some time to talk about it. So in the guidance you see within the worksheet, you can also see that they're talking about the case study, but then they're also reflecting on kind of what that might mean for their capacities as a producer and what sales they might already be making when it comes to selling to school nutrition programs, and having the opportunity to share that with the group as well. So we're supporting that kind of peer conversation and opportunity through these questions too. So I'm going to give it just like 2 minutes for folks to maybe read through one of the examples, just so you can get a sense of what these case studies look like and who we're featuring. And then I'd also like you to think about, this will kind of prompt us for our breakout session in a few minutes, but what are the case studies and examples that you would want to lift up in your state? So just take a moment to read through, and then we'll circle back and get your thoughts. All right. So in your very brief reading, did anybody think about question one. So question one for producers after they've read and reflected is going to be, what makes the school meal program and school district in this case study a good fit for the producer? So why was that a good relationship for them? Would anybody be willing to unmute and share which case study they skimmed or reviewed and what they saw as what made a good fit in partnership?
My name's Laura. I'll share. Can you hear me?
Yep, thanks, Laura.
So I read the second case study out of Goodhue County, Minnesota, and it seems like this one was I didn't get all the way through it, but it was a good fit because the corporation had a farm to school coordinator, and the farmers' goals jived with what the school was able to sell. So those were two things that stuck out to me, with the farmer wanting to scale up in fewer vegetables, but grow more of them. So.
Nice, great, Laura, thank you. Anything else stick out for folks who might have skimmed a different case study on what made a good partnership there, why it was a good match?
I read the same case study, but something I noticed in there also was that the school district had a relationship with the processor, which I thought was very important for them for getting the vegetables actually in a way that the schools could use them, which I thought was really important.
That's great. Thanks for lifting that up. All right, so when you implement this in your producer training, make sure to give everybody enough time to read and feel comfortable reading. Point them to having those questions beforehand. It's really nice to be able to read the questions, know what you're going to talk about before, and so folks can feel good about responding and thinking through as they're reading. So again, these are mini versions of the broader case studies. There are a ton of great case studies on the website that highlight these different partnerships and what's working for producers. So our last little section here is around procurement. And the following modules, again, go really into depth on what those farm to school sales look like on the producer side. This is just a very, very brief snapshot to help producers understand the perspectives of the school buyer and what they are having to adhere to, understanding the why they're asking the questions that they are asking of those producers. So in this section, we cover those procurement standards. So to understand that what school buyers are thinking about, they're adhering to the free and open competition, they're adhering to being responsive and responsible within their purchasing, they're adhering to both the federal regulations around purchasing as well as their own state and tribal. And of course, it's important here to be able to include any regulations from your state and make that regionalization that folks should know about. Also talking about geographic preference here and what that might mean for producers when they're looking at that RFA. So we've got sample language here that producers can look for to better understand what that geographic preference looks like in action and what that means for them as the supplier and as the producer. We also talk about the procurement methods. Again, just so producers kind of understand how that might influence the quantity that programs are purchasing at different times. Again, here, important to highlight that regionalization, especially in those thresholds. So right here, we have the federal thresholds. Really important to make sure that you're elevating those state level or even local level thresholds so producers are clear on what that looks like. And then we just very briefly touch on the procurement process. So through this process, understanding when that RFP is going to release and what that means for the ongoing relationship between the producer and the school buyer and what that process looks like. Again, next, Robert's going to really deep dive in Module 2 about what that procurement process looks like from the producer side, but this is just that high level vision and overview. So once we get a little taste for school food procurement, we're going to go into conclusion and a little bit of action planning that comes with this kind of high level overview of understanding school food programs. So one of our first wrap-up activities here is a School Food 101 game. And the aim here is both kind of to bring together the information that's been talked about through this module, as well as to kind of dispel some myths, some of the common myths about school food programs that producers might still have. So I'm going to ask you to play with me so you can unmute and yell it out. I would welcome a little cacophony. So please yell it out. This is true or false. Okay, so true or false, our first question is if I am not a fruit or vegetable producer, I cannot sell my products to child nutrition programs. True or false?
False.
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 All right, let's find out. Yes, false. Local foods can span the plate. So fruits and vegetables, meat, milk, dairy, or grains. All right, our next question here. The only way to get my products to children is through school lunch. True or false?
False.
Oh, false.
False. You are correct. So here we kind of recap many different types of programs, from lunch to breakfast to after school to the child and adult care food program and summer food and all the other special events and taste tests that can connect children to local food or can be a pathway for producers. All right, how about this one? Schools might be particularly interested in the sweet potatoes I grow because they are required to serve red and orange vegetables. True or false?
True. True.
True, true. All right, that brings us back to why those nutrition requirements might be relevant, to be able to identify some specific items that I already grow that schools might be interested in. All right. There is no way that schools can afford to purchase my products because of their spending limits. True or false?
False.
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 We're going to say false. Although the reimbursement rates may be limited, schools have a lot of flexibility in how they spend their funds. And we see a lot of great examples of schools purchasing local products to fit into their programs. All right, last one, I think. All right, different school food authorities and different child nutrition programs require different volumes of product. True or false?
True.
True. All right. Yeah, we just want to reinforce the different needs, different volume needs that might work for producers. Oh, and our last one. The United States Department of Agriculture dictates food safety requirements for schools.
False.
False.
False. All right. So in Module 4, we cover in-depth food safety, but in this module, we're really just touching on those myths, dispelling those myths so folks can prepare for food safety conversation later. So then we wrap up our action planning. We've got questions for reflection, really just helping producers think about reflecting on what they're already doing, based on these conversations we're having and preparing for their next stages of action planning. And then we've got the action planning check-in. And again, this is where we guide producers back to that action planning checklist and action planning template that Jenny Lee walked through with us. So important to give producers a little bit of time after each module to be thinking about that check-in and helping to develop that action plan. So before we move on, I did just want to make sure you know where to access that optional module C. It is in, module C, section C, module 1. It's an appendix C on page 117 in your facilitator guide. So all that optional content, it's the same format as the other modules with the thumb notes. and the talking points. So if you are interested, if that's something that producers are interested in, you can reference that specific module. All right, well, I'm going to pause for questions, and then we're going to go into our next breakout to work with our teams. But I will pause for some questions around Module 1 content. And again, really appreciate all your conversation and your feedback already too.
Maybe you touched on this already, but I'm curious about the school nutrition programs and how they vary per school or state, and what the best way to figure out how to find what kind of school nutrition program might be most relevant in our context.
And are you thinking identifying school nutrition programs that might be interested in purchasing?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think a great place to start is that USDA census. You can see which school districts are already purchasing local foods. I think connecting with your state agency folks who might be engaged in farm to school already, or even your regional leads, your USDA regional leads, might have some leads for connections within your state that for schools that are already interested in purchasing. And a lot of states, are doing matchmaking programs and finding ways to connect local producers to school districts. So connecting with that state level Department of Ed person might be also a good option. And yeah, would open it up to other folks too. I think that's a great conversation starter.
Thank you for that. That's helpful.
All right, well then we are going to jump into our state breakouts. And throughout the morning, you've heard a lot of different opportunities for regionalization and customization for the materials for your state. And so we're going to take some time as a team to start brainstorming. What are those opportunities to elevate? What are the stories and case studies to elevate within your state? So maybe there are case studies already existing, there's stories, there's videos. You want to make sure you capture all that. Or maybe there are just some really great partnerships between producers and schools that you want to elevate as an example. So we're going to start with that question, and then we're going to start with a second question around what are the programs and policies that you want to elevate. So maybe you have a Harvest of the Month program, or maybe you have a state plate program, or maybe your state even has a local incentive reimbursement. So we're going to talk about and start to capture all those kind of state-specific stories, policies, and programs. So for this, we are looking at Jamboards 4 and 5. In your state Jamboard. Again, you can find all of those if you don't have the link right at your fingertips within your participant home base. And I think Tracy is going to get us ready to break out. Your facilitators will be with you if you have any additional questions. And we're going to spend the next 15 minutes brainstorming within our teams.
For this next segment, we'll be hearing from Robert Maggiani from National Center for Appropriate Technology. So Robert, take it away.
Thank you, Thomas. I'm going to be waiting for Tammy to join me. She's going to help me do this, but I just will say I'm glad to be joining the project here from the great state, Texas, great city of San Antonio that will be celebrating its 300th birthday later this year. So, Tammy, are you ready? Tammy, you're on mute.
Hey, can y'all see this?
Tammy, we see your PowerPoint app, but it's not the presentation. It's as if you were going to edit the presentation.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that the screen sharing worked. Okay. Take it away, Robert.
Okay, hold on. I can't get to my PowerPoint yet. I'm not sure why it won't let me off here. Can you unshare for a minute, Tammy, and let me see if I can't get off? Okay, now I can see my PowerPoint.
Okay, and Jenna was saying it was a little bit blurry, so.
I think that was before it was in presenter mode, Tammy.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay, well, now that we've heard Lacey's great presentation of Module 1, we're going to jump into Module 2 and answer a few more detailed questions. The way we structured this was to try to anticipate the questions that might be happening in the producers' minds as they're sitting in the audience for these trainings. And so we could envision the producer sitting there listening to the introduction and seeing Module 1 and saying, well, I'm interested in this. I want to grow my farm. I want to grow my business. So I'm ready to really think about this. But golly, I live 27 miles from nowhere. How am I going to get my stuff to where I want to sell it? I don't want to be driving all day, every day to try to do this. How do I make this work? And who do I talk to? I don't want to go make a fool of myself. I got to know what to say and how to talk about it. So those are some of the questions that we tried to anticipate as we kind of thought about Module 2. If you go to second slide, Tammy, you'll see as Lacey did, I'd like to have y'all really literally go to page 46 in your facilitator guide, just to get used to handling the guides, and it's also on producer workbook page 17. There's slightly different presentations, but you can see it's a kind of a macro level view of what we're trying to do in Module 2. And you can see that we're suggesting, or we're estimating, that the time to do it, the way that we have it structured, is about 2 hours. And again, as other people have mentioned, as you change your way of presenting it based on your audience, the size of your audience, or what types of products they're selling or whatever, it may take more or less than 2 hours. But the way we've modeled, Module 2, we're guessing it's going to take about 2 hours. Next slide, Tammy. So if you look again at a little bit different view, you can see across the top where as you go across the columns, the training topic and duration, the learning objectives, the content and core concepts, and then of course the training activities that reinforce what we want to try to get across as the learning objectives. You'll see we have 2 sections here in Module 2. I'll talk about them here in the visual here in a minute, but Section A, we're guessing will take about 45 minutes. Section B will take a little bit longer than an hour. Section A is geared toward answering that first question that I was mentioned, that we're hoping or thinking that the producers are going to be having in their mind. How do I get my stuff to where I want to sell it to the schools, or even if it's more than one school? And so we're going to talk about the marketing channel. That's what Section A deals with. And so let's look at our next slide, Tammy. Here are a presentation of all the core concepts and also the phrases, if you wish, the glossary terms that you'll become more familiar with as you give these presentations and trainings more often. You can see that we want to talk about the food supply chain and market channels. Those are related, but those are not the same thing. Distributor and wholesale marketing practices. What are some of the similarities based on whether a distributor is a national distributor or a local distributor or regional distributor? What are some of the similarities? What are some of the differences? The on-farm food safety, that's a big one. When I was selling vegetables to schools back in 1980, we didn't really deal with that on-farm food safety much, but now it's a different world. Product standards, grading, specifications, all of those are important core concepts that we want to talk to the producers about, go into a little bit of detail, and try to get their feedback on how they relate to what does that mean as it relates to their farm. All right, Tammy, next slide, please. And as I mentioned, the glossary, let's go look at page 105, for example, in your facilitator guide. Let's look at a couple. Collective purchasing, that's one that's interesting here in Texas because we have an entity. I don't know if y'all have them in any of your states for the folks who are listening, but we have an entity in here in Texas called the Education Service Center. They serve specific regions of the state. And one of the things they do for the school districts that are in their service area is they offer sometimes collective purchasing groups. And so you can see a collective purchasing group, according to our glossary, is utilized when school districts participate in state and regional purchasing cooperatives and buying groups in order to help school districts obtain greater buying power. And so that's what the education service centers do here in Texas. Let's take a look at another one, a food broker, the last one on that page. An independent business that brokers sales between farmer, producer, and an intermediary buyer, usually a distributor or a retailer. So the question might come up, well, how is a broker different from a wholesaler? Well, we'll get into that. But the important part here is that you're going to have a glossary and you're going to have to learn some shared vocabulary and be able to use these terms in the way that the people who are in the industry all day, every day, learn to use them and use them. All right, Tammy, next slide, please. The learning objectives, again, each module is going to start out with, these are the things that we want the producers to be comfortable with once they get through this module. What are the best market channels for each individual producer? Understand how to read and respond to a solicitation. What is a solicitation? What is it for? Why do schools do it? How do you read it? It's almost like a different language for a lot of producers. Understand how to meet the product quality standards of school markets. That's an interesting topic. A lot of schools are now opting to maybe not always spec USDA #1 on specialty crop items so they can get more local food into their menus. A lot of times that's a barrier that local producers can't get over. And then, of course, the last learning objectives you see on the page, understand how to approach and communicate with school buyers. The one thing that I've learned from dealing with producers for the last 40 years is they hate to think that they look like a fool when they approach anybody or talk to anybody. And that's going to be very important as we help them get comfortable with dealing with school food service folks. Next slide, please. And so let's just look at Section A in detail. Again, we're estimating it's going to take about 45 minutes. As Lacey talked about in Module 1, here's an opportunity to use Jeopardy. It's a game that everybody knows. It's kind of fun. You can see that the categories we're suggesting here do exactly relate to those core concepts. So that's not just those categories, those Jeopardy categories are not random. They're specifically focusing on the core concepts we're trying to really enforce here with the producers. And you can see this not only is a market, not only is this an opportunity to reinforce the vocabulary, but it also gives you the opportunity to regionalize the answers. And so you're doing both with this game. For example, let's take market channels as a category. You know, here in Texas, for example, I might say, all right, let's pick market channels for 100, and you pop up on the board there and it says, what is Labatt Food Services? And then, of course, a producer in the audience might say, well, it's a regional wholesaler that's headquartered in San Antonio, Texas. Let's take market channels for $400. It comes up and says, what is the largest national food service broadline distributor with headquarters in Houston? Anybody have an answer? Anybody want to blurt out an answer? The answer is Cisco. But anyway, you can see this is a way to not only have some fun and focus and encourage the core concepts, but to really regionalize the answers. next slide, please, Tammy. And here you can get into really some detail for the producers to try to help them answer that question that they're probably have in their mind. How do I get my stuff to where it's got to go? And so you can see we will talk about as we go into the slides in the presentation, the training that you're really going to be given to the producers. You'll go into the 3 different channels and talk about I guess the subsections of each of the channel. For example, next slide, the intermediated market channels. You'll see there's several example local retail outlets. In my experience, that's really only an option for in the rural areas. If you have a producer who wants to sell product into urban school districts, really selling it to a retail outlet that's going to resell it to a school district is probably not a real thing. So if you see that your audience is made up of a lot of rural farmers, or if you specifically tailor your audience in a rural area for rural farmers, then you could maybe even have as one of your co-presenters a person from a local grocery store who does have that function in that rural area. That is a real thing in rural areas. When I was farming in South Texas, we did use that in the rural area where I was farming. So regional aggregators and food hubs. We'll talk about a food hub here in just a minute. Value-added processors. In almost every state, there are literally hundreds of those small-scale processors who, not necessarily all of them are going to be interested in school food service, but there are going to be some. The state departments of agriculture is a good way to find out where those folks are. Certainly here in Texas, they make it pretty easy to find them. Independent and local regional distributors. I just mentioned that one that's important to us here in Texas, Labatt. Again, you might specifically seek out a representative from an independent local and regional distributor to be one of your co-presenters as you're making this presentation to the farmers. It's always good to really give a real world example of what the things are you are talking about. And specifically as it relates to food hubs, Tammy, you want to play the video, please?
Of producers that we work with. Those producers are primarily within a 50-mile radius of us here in Brattleboro, but the more time goes on, the more that we're able to bring in some producers and some special products from a little bit farther afield. So we have this roster of producers, and we list on a weekly basis, twice weekly. We offer their products to our customers through a web portal, an e-commerce site, essentially. When they do order from us through the website or any other way that we then enter into our web platform, that delivery is made as a unit on a set delivery day, up to twice a week right now, and the customer is invoiced for that order as a unit. So no matter how many producers they're buying from at once, they're getting one invoice. We technically do take ownership of the product, but a lot of the product that we sell on what we call a just-in-time basis. We have an order cycle, customers place their orders, we cut it off, we assemble our purchase orders for farms in our area. We send out those purchase orders to farms, and they pick, wash, and pack to order on a 1-day turnaround, typically 1 to 2 days. And then we deliver that freshly picked, freshly packed product straight to the customer. When it comes to produce to schools, almost all of that is still picked up straight from the farm, delivered the next day. And that's something that we take a lot of pride in being able to do. And I think our customers really value knowing that when they're ordering from the farm, they know it's just down the road. They know they're not getting something that's been stored for days or weeks. They're getting something straight from the farm.
Okay, I'm getting back there.
Okay, Tammy, thank you. Food hubs. Food hubs are kind of a recent phenomenon in the last maybe 10 years of local producers coming together to try to take advantage of that attribute of localness and trying to work with an organization that will do some of the things that individual farmers can't do, like having refrigerated trucks or refrigerated cold storage, or being able to deliver to many schools rather than, a farmer really wants to, most of the farmers I know really want to stay on the farm and just farm, and they want to deliver to one place. And that's what food hubs can really help in smaller farmers aggregate their product and also emphasize the localness and the freshness. And we'll talk about later about maybe how we can try to convince the school food service personnel when they write their specs to include some of the verbiage on localness and freshness and harvested within X number of hours and things like that that can really give some advantage to local products. So food hubs, if you're interested in trying to find out where they are, you can see this link here on this slide. You can go to the AMS website and input your state and see where the existing food hubs are in your state. And we would encourage each of y'all to try to get someone from a food hub to be, again, a co-presenter to some of the producer trainings that you're going to do around your state, particularly if you're going to do a training that's in a city or a region that's close to one of the hubs. They really are important players in moving local product in their region and sub-region. So there you can see the link. I think here in Texas that we have about like 8 or 10 official food hubs that you could pull off on this link with AMS website. All right, Tammy, thank you. If you go to the next page. Here is market channels, just a presentation of regional distributors and national wholesale distributors, trying to talk about and present how they're similar and how they're different. And so I think that's an important distinction that you'll need to make to your producers, that yes, you could look at saying, well, all they do is aggregate product and then in turn they resell it. Well, that's true, but there are some important differences, particularly if you're going to try to deal with major national broadline distributors, then you're really getting into some food safety issues and documentation and certification that a lot of producers don't want to do. It's expensive, it's hard. So anyway, there's a presentation, and it's important to make that distinction of how they're different. Tammy, go to the next slide, please. Here's a presentation on, again, these slide numbers are according to the actual slide presentation that you'll be making at your producer trainings. You'll see that the direct to school supply chains, there's a little bit of detail in that one slide. They're not always necessarily just when the farmer delivers his or her produce to the back door of a school or their commissary. There are also scenarios where school personnel will go to a local farmer's market and contract with one of the farmers there for delivery. or they could actually, a farm or a school, I'm sorry, could be an actual CSA drop-off point. So there are, it's not always just where the farmer has to make the direct delivery to the back door of the school. Those are some creative ways. If you could have a producer who actually does that, find someone who actually does sell through a farmer's market or a CSA drop-off point or something like that, that would be very interesting to have that person at your producer training. That would really broaden their imagination. Next slide, Tammy. This one is pretty straightforward. There are some good reasons for farmers to do direct to school, and there are some ramifications and implications that a farmer may not think about unless we remind him or her. And so this is kind of like the pros and the cons, the yays and the nays of going a certain channel. And it's important that we help take the farmers through the thought process of this with every channel. What are the yays and the nays of doing each one? And so you can see a couple of them for the direct to school. You get high level of customer satisfaction. It allows you to retain and grow your brand. If you're really thinking about, if a farmer's really thinking about scaling up, the whole idea of protecting his or her brand and promoting his or her brand is an important decision for that farmer. So that could be a big deal for an individual farmer. Tammy, next slide. And so here's the activity that we want to help guide the producers to go through as they start thinking to themselves the pros and the cons, or the rating, the relative rating of each of these options. For example, you can see this sheet right here. If you just look at the first row, profit margins, you have your three different channels, or your ways of getting your product to the school. And the intention here is for each individual farmer to put in that space what he or she thinks is the relative rating of profit margin, profit, or a possibility for direct to school. Let's say he or she rates that as a 5, and then they might rate intermediate, including food hubs, as a 3, and a wholesale broadline distributor as a 2. And then so then after each of the producers in the training or the workshop has done that, then you go back over it with them and ask them, why is it that they rated profit margin for direct to school as so much better than intermediated possibility? And then you ask them to kind of defend their reasoning and see if it really does make sense. And so it's a wonderful exercise when you ask the producers to go through each of these aspects of their decision. And you can see we talk about the profit margin rating, the time investment, the equipment packaging and instruction, the insurance, the certification, the time spent marketing. These are all important aspects of the decision that they're going to be making, and we're asking them to go through one by one. This is a really valuable worksheet, in my opinion, that it would, I think, behoove the training to really take 20 minutes or so. And again, you'll have to plan your training as best you can, but in my opinion, this is a really important worksheet. Let's go to the next slide. Now that'll take us to section B. Trying to answer the questions for the producers. Who is it that I'm going to be talking to? How do we talk to each other? What's the language we talk to each other in? What are all these terms mean, like product specification and all of those things? Go to the next slide, Tammy, please. And so here's the first one we deal with. What's a school solicitation? That can be, from a small school district, something very simple like, I want this many cases of each of these products per week for the next 6 weeks, and it's a 1-pager. Or the solicitations for big urban school districts are very complicated, and we show some examples in our list of resources here that go from very simple to very complicated. And so you have to present that to the producer and say, It depends. You know, that's one of the things that you have to take into consideration when you start choosing who you're going to sell to. How dramatic is reading the solicitation and responding to it, and all of those different certifications you have to have, or levels of insurance, or all of those different kind of barriers that you have to get over in order to really even apply to answer one of the solicitations. And then the last thing, you can see the slide there, on product specifications. Sometimes farmers aren't really include in on what product specs are. Yeah, they understand that they got to sell good stuff that's safe to eat and looks good. But when you get down really into the specifics of it, has to be a specific variety, has to be a certain size. When you receive it, they're going to temp it, and so that means it's got to be, you know, at a certain temperature. All of those things, when you start looking at them in one place, it really makes a producer think, ooh, that's a bigger deal than maybe I had thought it to be. So this whole other thing about understanding product specification, you need to go pretty much in detail and really impress upon the producers that this could be something they either need to opt out of. They think they grow the greatest carrots in the world, but unless they can bag them in 2-pound bags and each of the carrots is, you know, perfectly straight and they're only 10 to 12 inches long and they're peeled, well, maybe they shouldn't even think about selling carrots. So that's what specs will help a producer decide. The next slide, please. Here's another activity that we're suggesting. All of the different considerations, the specs, the timing, how many different schools are written in the RFP. Do you have to deliver to each school? That in my experience is the greatest barrier to farmer participation. When they read an RFP, they can say, oh yeah, I can do all that specs. I can make sure that I grade my produce correctly. I can make sure that I cool it correctly. I can do all of those things, but when the RFP says you have to deliver to 30 schools by 6:30 every morning, that takes them out of the game. So the whole thing of looking at all the considerations at one time really helps a producer narrow what he or she thinks he can do and really can afford to do. Next slide, please, Tammy. The conclusion is it's again, those are the questions we were anticipating that producers were going to be asking themselves. How do I get my stuff to where they're going to want it? Who do I talk to? How do I know how to talk to them? What language do I need to use? You know, how do I go visit them at any time? Or what are the rules? What are the rules of the game? And so case studies, here are some suggested ones that we've put in our list of resources. Again, as Lacey has mentioned and Tammy has mentioned, if you can start regionalizing your own case studies, that's even better. When producers can see someone on the screen, or you know, hear a video or a podcast or something from somebody from their same state, or somebody who, you know, that they know, somebody who they know that knows them, that's powerful when they can really relate to who it is they're looking at. Next slide, please, Tammy. And then as you're coming to the end of module 2, these are the things that we need to be, I won't say sure of, but as much as possible as you're you know, ending your producer training. These are what the producers have to know, and you have to be able to, and we have some exercises that they can fill out in the producer workbook that try to get to this evaluation. So each producer in your audience can say to himself or herself, I understand the market channel options. I know what my farm is. I know what I farm well. I know what, you know, I know that I have squash at the time of the year when the school needs it. It's not during the summer when they don't need it. It's all of those things, if they match up, I know the market channel options that are really legitimate for me. I know the basics of working with intermediated and wholesale distributors and why one would be better for me than another. And maybe it's just to start with. Maybe I'm just going to start. I want to only sell, again, I'll go back to carrots. All I want to do is sell carrots to my local school district. And so my first step into selling to schools is going to be simple, and it's just going to be me and my truck, and I'm going to take 50 cases of carrots to one place, and that's it. That's how I'm going to start. I know how to find and respond to school solicitations. Now that's going to take that's going to be a more leap of faith when it comes to the farmers really feeling comfortable to do that. And related to the comment that Jane had in the chat a while ago, you know, it would certainly be helpful to have some infrastructure, some people that these farmers could come back to time and time again as they're you know, reaching out and reading these solicitations and say, oop, I don't really quite understand what that is. Maybe I can call somebody, whoever that is. Maybe it's somebody at the Department of Ag or the Department of Education or their local extension agent or somebody that there's that infrastructure of people they can rely on as they get bolder and bolder as they try to get into selling to schools. It's going to be very important to have that infrastructure. And so I understand common school purchasing practices, quality standards, vendor requirements. Those are the things that we have to feel confident that farmers are learning, that they know that they can make legitimate decisions about their farm. Because you know, when we're asking farmers to do this, farmers and ranchers, we couldn't be asking them to make some expensive investments in their farm, particularly as it relates to specialty crops and cooling. That's a big one. For farmers to really get into selling to schools, they're going to have a cooler, and they're going to have refrigerated transportation. That's again, my experience, that's been pretty much, you have to have that. I understand that. And of course, the last one, I understand how schools expect to receive local products. Those are things they need to be confident in at least a pretty good understanding. The last slide here, you see we put these pictures on here. These are pictures that I picked from my region, although the first picture there is, I don't know if anybody could guess that, but that's really the New Mexico Chile, hatch Chile harvest that happens in late summer. It's a big deal in New Mexico and kind of in Texas also. The picture on the right, the citrus, is a local extension agent and a couple of the Texas A&M citrus experts down in the valley. The chicken picture is from an operation of a friend of mine close to Austin who does a big pasture poultry operation. But here, the point is this is where you really personalize your presentation to your audience. You have your state training teams really pick the examples that make sense. You could find, maybe even have a list of resources available at your trainings. Who are the, somebody mentioned earlier, how do you know which schools are really doing this? Well, you know, this may take some homework on our part of finding out through the Department of Ag or through the Department of Education, which are the real school districts that are the champions, and you go talk to them and maybe get them to be a presenter, a co-presenter with you also, and ask them who are they, who are also part of their circle of influence when they're doing their farm to school stuff. Here in Texas, we're lucky the Department of Ag is also the agency that does all the food and nutrition conduit stuff in Texas. So all the Ag department has 2 or 3 marketing specialists who do nothing but farm to school. They allocate a good amount of resources to creating websites and marketing promotions. They have Harvest of the Month contests all over the state. They have a a website listing of all the farmers and ranchers who want to sell to schools. So if a school district in, way away from Austin where the department is, wants to know, well, who in my region is selling vegetables, then they can go to the website at TDA and find those people. And so there are resources probably in each state. I don't know if to that extent, but it's up to us to kind of pull those together as we're making the presentations to the producers and help them have some resources even when they're starting. It's real daunting for a producer who, again, who's kind of a small producer thinking about it, wants to sell his or her stuff starting at their local school because that's where their kids go. What a great connection, right? That's just a natural thing that many farmers want to do, is start by selling where their kids go to school. But they have to have a comfort level that once they start down this road, they're not going to be immediately saying, well, I can't do that. I can't do that. I don't know how to do that. I don't know who does that. And so that's up to us. And so this last slide here, again, this is the opportunity for you to really take all of those pictures off and put the ones on there that you want. So Tammy, the last slide. There's my contact information. Again, I'm coming to y'all from Texas. That's where I'm at. And I don't know much about the resources that are available in the states where y'all are from. So I apologize if I can't answer any questions about who are some of the actors in the states that are in this region.
Do we want to maybe answer some questions? And then I was gonna, Robert, bring up a PDF copy of my producer workbook and share the solicitation packet that we can maybe kind of show some details of the, the different worksheets, maybe while you answer some questions from folks.
Okay. Let me pull up the chats here. Here's, let me start here. It says states, I don't really see a question yet. I see some comments and some posting of resources.
We've got one question right here at the end, Robert, around talking about recognizing that specifications may really change from school to school. So approaching being able to talk about general market requirements while also acknowledging that some of those specifications are going to change. Can you talk about how to talk about specs in a general way while the specs in reality vary? Do you have any recommendations for that?
USDA publishes what they consider, and I'll limit my discussion here really to fresh fruits and vegetables because that's what I really know the most about. But USDA does publish their grading standards. Most school districts will immediately say they want USDA #1 or better, and so a way to look at that quickly to learn what that means in a lot of aspects of the product is to check the USDA database on what's a #1 carrot, for example. Again, I'll stick with carrots. So that's one way to find out pretty quick in a general way with every product what really is a #1. What's the width can it be? How long can it be? What is the characteristics of how many flaws will it have? On an orange, for example, a #1, I think there's a certain limited percentage of the surface area that can have a blemish. So there are ways to look at everything, and then you're correct in saying some school districts have specs that will differ, and really the only way to find that out is to get an RFP or go ask someone you know, farmers, it's really interesting, in my opinion. If you're really serious about finding someone at the schools that's close to you that you can talk to, you'll be able to find someone who knows someone who knows someone that you can start a conversation with. And so, um, I'm trying to think of Austin ISD, for example, has a very aggressive local produce effort, and they do buy a lot of local carrots that, interestingly enough, do not meet USDA #1 spec for carrots, because a lot of the local carrots are not straight. They're crooked, and they have multiple points. And so Austin ISD has made it a specific decision to say, we want local carrots that are harvested within a certain distance of the main office or the warehouse where they receive stuff, and that are harvested within 48 hours. And so that's really the only spec that would limit a producer from essentially trying to sell his or her carrots to Austin ISD. They have to have been harvested within 2 days, and they they have to be free from blemish. But it's an interesting example, because when you go to Austin ISD, they have a lot of what you might even consider ugly carrots on their serving line. So it's an interesting example of a spec, an ISD writing a spec that's unusual. I don't see any other. Can you talk about how specs in general? Again, most schools will spec USDA #1, and so if you want to go to the AMS website and just search for, what are my USDA #1 characteristics, you can get to the web page, and then you just pick the product that you're looking for, and you can see what would pass as USDA #1 or USDA #2. Maybe you can get your food service director to spec a #2, and you have a better opportunity to sell your local product. A lot of local product doesn't really grade well in the sense of USDA grades.
Thanks everybody for sharing these awesome resources on here too. They're great region specific resources. And I'm just gonna quickly bring up the school specifications packet that is in as an appendices in the producer workbook. So folks can see how to help producers. And I had mentioned in the chat that this is a great opportunity for doing some regionalization. All right, so the school specifications packet is Appendix C. And as you can see, if you look at this online, again, this is in the producer workbook. There are some enclosed sample solicitations. And as I had mentioned, this might be a great opportunity for you to replace some of these sample solicitations with stuff that is more region or state specific. And then we go to some of these worksheets that are tied into those applied activities. So, here's a really great school market readiness evaluation. And here, I'm gonna make sure that I like looking at a single page view.
Tammy, your screen is really blurry for us to see. Maybe if you shut your video off, it might help us. I don't know.
Oh, I'm so terribly sorry. I am not sure why it's so blurry.
If you shut your video off, your internet might be able to catch up.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll do that. How's that?
Yes.
Do you want me to I can refresh too. Is that helping?
So much better.
It is
Oh,
readable now. Yeah. we
Okay.
can-
Oh, I'm so terribly sorry. I didn't. Of course, I see it completely clear. So, um, okay. So this is that worksheet B, and it might seem a little awkward just because it's in its own packet, but and it's not embedded in the workbook like the rest of the worksheets, but we encourage you as facilitators to spend a lot of time on these solicitations. So, or on the solicitation packet. So this just kind of has folks looking at the, viewing the solicitations, either these ones if you, or local ones, and then, asking a series of questions. And that might be a really great opportunity to have folks do some breakouts by enterprise, and, kind of go back and forth, asking the questions that and go through this piece. And then the last is not really, it's not really a worksheet, but it's kind of something that if, that the producers can turn to when they're ready to have that meeting with the school nutrition director. And it's just a checklist of things to ask and consider in that piece. So I think this is just a really great primer for, responding to solicitations. And I don't know, did you want to say anything about the solicitation packet, Robert?
My experience with solicitation packets is they can be very intimidating. They're full of jargon, and it's going to be a real issue for most producers to get through them, and they're going to have to lean on y'all and other people that you take to your producer trainings to really get them through it. It is a slog. You can see this one example here is how many pages, Tammy?
Okay, so the Durango one is that I'm looking at right now is, it's not huge. It's 7 pages, lots of addendums though.
Mm-hmm.
So addendums A through H, right? So
it's just a skill that we have to let the producers know that if they want to get into this world of selling to schools, they have to be able to read solicitations, and maybe one of the things that they'll eventually get to do is have fellow farmers that they can rely on. Maybe their neighbor wants to get in it also, and they kind of create a team that understands it. There's no easy way to read solicitations unless you're, again, my experience is in a real small school district. The RFPs are very short, very straightforward. I want, 100 cases of this every 2 weeks delivered here by 6:30. USDA number 1. We'll temp it. If it doesn't pass temp, then we won't accept it. Otherwise, that's it.
oh yeah, and I see Sarah also pointed out the wholesale success workbook, which we at NCAT, we use a lot when we're working with producers. So definitely encourage folks to use that as a resource, and then as well as point your producers to the resource. I believe it's free online, but it does cost a lot of money to get a print hard copy.
This last I guess question or comment by Jane again relates to the question of infrastructure, people who can be around to help farmers. She's saying there's a scenario here where 15 farmers are interested in selling. The nutrition director doesn't want to talk to 15 individuals. That's correct. So then you're getting into the need, in air quotes, for a co-op organizer in a sense, because that's what the farmers would have to do if they want to make it happen. And she's correct in saying the food service director is not going to want to talk to 15 people. So then maybe someone at Extension might help them, form a co-op, or thinking about maybe even just a buying club, where not necessarily legally a co-op, where 2 or 3 of those 15 farmers create an LLC that buys from the other farmers. And then the food service director would only be buying from that LLC. There are ways that you can aggregate without having to legally form a co-op.
Yeah, and that would be, that would be a very regional workshop and region-specific workshop, and I think if you're that hyper local in your local producer trainings, then those types of conversations that Robert's talking about would be really great and useful and fruitful. And
there are, I don't know if in every state, but I'm guessing in most states, there are entities that are contracted by the USDA Rural Development to be co-op training entities. Here in Texas, for example, there are 2 that if farmers are interested in forming a legal co-op, they can go meet with these 2 entities, and those entities are tasked with helping them do that. So I'm guessing there's some sort of USDA rural development contractor that someone can find. I don't see any other questions.
Yeah, please feel free to unmute and ask any kind of final questions on Module 2. We understand there's all of these modules have a ton of information in them, and we are giving you, we hope, just enough information about the module without making it too tedious.
Again, the module 2 was really our way of anticipating trying to answer those 2 questions that we see forming in the producer's mind. How do I get my stuff to where it needs to go? And who do I talk to? How do I know how to talk to them? How do I know the language they're going to talk to me in? That's what we're trying to answer in module 2. No other comments, Tammy. I guess we'll go to the next item.
All right, folks, welcome back. We've got one more segment of our afternoon to kind of start to bring these pieces together and think about how you're going to bring these pieces back home to your state and potential trainings in the future. So in our next 25-ish minutes, we are going to be circling back up with your state teams. I'm going to share my screen very briefly so we can get a sense of what we'll be going over for these next 25 minutes with your team. So we've got 3 Jamboard prompts, 6, 7, and 8 for the next 20 minutes here. So first, you're going to spend a little time. Hopefully you may recognize this little icon here. This is that outline of the 4 module content. And so our goal within this discussion is to think about who within your team has the expertise, content knowledge, connections related to these different modules. And then think about where you might be missing some gaps and who within your state might be able to fill those knowledge gaps and those training gaps. So we'll spend some time there thinking about the composition and building your training team. Hopefully many of you have had the chance to watch the Building Your Training Team video that's available online that really goes into depth on what an ideal training team could look like and things to think about. We're also going to return to our trainer action plan. So as you might remember, you do have a hard copy of this trainer action plan in your folder, but this Jamboard is a way to kind of interactively walk through it together. So we're going to go to the Building Your Training Team component of the trainer action plan. And what you can do here is walk through with your team these different assessment points for building your training team. And through that, you'll be able to identify where some of these opportunities or maybe not quite built up partnerships have come for your training team yet. And you'll want to think about the action steps to help build those relationships, to help think about how to build that team effectively. Also, what your timeline is. Some of you, as we talked about, are thinking about these in the next 6 months. Some are looking a little bit farther out. So thinking about your timeline and then what you need for support to keep that going. And then finally, as your team has time, again, we know folks are working at different paces here, we're going to circle back to that idea of making it local. And we know that you did a little work earlier on Jamboards 5 and 6 in our previous breakout, thinking about all of those different ideas, programs, case studies, policies you want to bring to make it local within your training. So you're going to walk through the assessment here to make sure that your team has an idea and understanding of how to customize and utilize those local resources within the training. Thinking about the action steps you want to take to fill any gaps you see in that assessment, and then coming back to that timeline and resources. So that's going to be the next 20 minutes with your team. And then we're going to come back for a very brief debrief and closure for the day. So I think, Tracy, if you are ready for us, we can break out.
Event or policy or producer story that you would like to be uplifted in your state training. Just take one more moment to share some final thoughts here. Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you so much. Tomorrow, we'll continue to build on the module learning with deep dives into modules 3 and 4, and of course, more time working with state teams. Please join us again. If you have any questions between now and then, feel free to reach out to me. But have a good evening. It was a great day, and we covered a lot of ground.